Hi, I'm Kai Narezo. I don't have a guitar today because we're going to look at palmas. Palmas are the hand claps, and the palmas rhythms are really the foundation of all the compás and all the rhythm. So learning these patterns is incredibly helpful. And if you can really learn and internalize these patterns of the palmas, it's like learning to tap your foot and really keep the beat. It's that important to your time and to your compás, which we talk about all the time. I'm not going to get into the technique of it. There's basically two kinds of palmas that we do. There's the quieter ones called the sordas, where we sort of cup our hands like this. There's the louder ones where we do sort of fingers on palm. And that's really just a dynamics thing. So if you watch and listen to enough flamenco, you'll start to hear the difference between these sort of quieter, muffled sounding ones and these clearer, louder ones. But that's not really what's important. For today, what's important is learning the patterns. We're going to start by looking at the 12-beat patterns, the Soleá, Soleá por Buleria, Alegrias, and Buleria. These are probably the most important ones to learn first. So in all cases, we're talking about a 12-beat compás with accents on 12, 3, 6, 8, 10, and 12 again. Or in some cases, as we'll see, 12, 3, and then 7, 8, 9, 10. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. The first thing you want to get used to, which sounds really simple, is the basic Solea, which is a 12-beat. We're actually starting on 1 because Solea tends to start on 1, although occasionally it'll start to feel like it starts on 12. We'll get into that. And so what we're looking at, the first thing you want to do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 12, etc. So all I'm doing is playing the 12 beats and accenting 3, 6, 8, 10, and 12. So you really want to be able to do this consistently. For most people, the tricky part is when you get to 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12, etc. You want to be able to do this consistently without ever getting lost. I'm going a little faster than we might do for Soleá, but the tempo is actually less important than these patterns that we're learning. So once you've really internalized 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we're going to change it up. We're going to do 1 and 2, 3. So all I've done is subdivide beat 1 into 2 eighth notes. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you'll notice I'm not accenting 6 here. And then we're going to do 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12. So it's very similar to what we were doing before, except that we're not hitting the 6 as a strong accent, and we're subdividing 1 and 7 and 9. So one more time. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12. The next thing we want to do is a little tricky. We're going to drop the downbeat on 1, which means that rather than do 1 and 2, 3, we're going to go 1 and 2, 3. Sounds easy. 1 and 2, 3, but it's a little tricky if you're not used to doing this. So I want you to just practice 1 and 2, 3. 1 and 2, 3. So if you say 1 and 2, 3, you're just not doing a palma on the 1. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12, 1 and 2, 3. So again, 12, 1 and 2, 3. That's the tricky part for a lot of people. I'm just going to do it a couple times. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1 and 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. If we speed this up, this is perfectly appropriate for Alegrias and Soleá por Buleria. And actually all 3 patterns that we've done will work perfectly for Alegrias and Soleá por Buleria. I should say, Solea por Buleria and Alegria can start on 1 or on 12, really in equal measure. Soleá tends to start on 1, Bulerias tends to start on 12, and in both cases, more often than not, Soleá does start on 1 and Buleria starts on 12. Alegrias and Soleá por Buleria can really go either way, and they feel fine. So you need to get used to both. Our Palmas pattern, we can either do 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. See how that starts to feel like the downbeat. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the one we really want to get to is 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1 and 2, 3. So this is the same thing that we talked about a minute ago. 12, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1 and 2, 3. Exactly the same as Soleá, just faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And in all of these, you feel that 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, kind of drive to the 3. And I talk a lot about how the basic compás is really driving towards the 3 and then driving back to resolving on the 10. And you get that in the Palmas pattern. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, right? So there's 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can also do combinations of the more basic pattern. So we could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. You can mix them up any way you want, really. But I would learn that 1, 2, 3 pattern as well as you can, but work up to it. Start with 12, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, drop the 1, 12, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It might take a minute to get these really solid, but stick with it. This is really important for your compás. So the Buleria is the fastest of these 12-beat, and there's other 12-beat compasses, but these when we refer to the 12-beat compás, it's really the Soleá, the Soleá por Buleria, the Buleria with the Alegrias in there. The Bulerias, the first thing I would do is the same as we did before, it's just faster. It's 12, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're not going to subdivide any of these because we're going kind of too fast to go 1, 2, 3. It just gets a little weird. But what we are going to do is play with 6, 8, 10 versus 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're going to accent things a little bit differently. And so we're going to have two options. We're going to have 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the difference is 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 versus 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're just accenting differently. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10. Another common Buleria one, which is a little tricky, is to just lock in on triplets and not play the first of each. So starting on 12, you'd go 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a really useful one, and it's a little more advanced because it does get tricky. So what I would recommend at first is just as you're listening to any Bulerias that you like, just try to feel that 12, 3, 7, 8, 9. Don't even count, but feel this sort of waltzy feel. 12, 1, 2, 3, because we're just doing the same thing over and over. But it feels different depending on what part of the compás you're in, because you're doing 12, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Right? So the first part feels like 12, 3, and then the second part feels like that drive towards 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there's that 10, 11, which you can do 12, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You can keep the dynamic the same, but because there's that strong drive to 10 in the Buleria, I find myself doing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You still end on 10, not 11. If you look for the link to Palmas loops, you will find loops of these Palmas patterns at various tempos. So you can play around with playing to these patterns, because in addition to learning to actually do the Palmas and hear these patterns, the really important thing as a guitarist is to learn to play over these patterns. Once these become internalized, they really support you and they help you know where you are in the compás. At first, as you're learning them, they can really throw you off. So it's an interesting dynamic, because you're learning the patterns and they start to make sense, and then you try to play to them and you're completely lost. And then with time, as you do them more, you start to understand better the relationship between the Palmas patterns and the music. And then when you pick up the guitar again, the Palmas makes more sense. So it's a little bit of a struggle, I know, but the more you do this, the more the Palmas will feel supportive, and the more they do, the more you'll internalize the compás and your compás will get better. The Palmas for Seguirillas are not any weirder than any of the other Palmas. What's weird about the Seguirilla really is counting it. So I'm going to show you the Palmas for Seguirillas, but we're really going to talk for just a second about how do you count Seguirillas, because it's so confusing. The bottom line is that all the methods of counting Seguirillas are some sort of compromise. The most common one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The obvious compromise right there is that in no other kind of music do we count number beats, where some of these beats are much longer than the other ones. So to do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 really makes no sense. However, this is what we do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the other ways of counting it, because I know that there's a lot of other methods out there, and some of them can feel like they make more sense. And maybe they do, but they're still less common. So if you wind up in Spain with a bunch of people playing flamenco doing a seguirilla, they're going to talk about beat 4. And if you don't understand this way of counting a seguirilla, you're going to be confused. One of the sort of two clever ways of counting a seguirilla that I've heard a lot is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which makes perfect sense. If you take a Soleá and you take the two halves and you flip them, you get 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 3, 6. This is Seguirilla pattern. Absolutely. But there's two problems. One is that who starts on 8? That's just crazy. Not any more crazy than having your beat 3 and 4 be longer than your beat 1 and 2, but it's a crazy that hasn't really been accepted by people who do flamenco, so I'm going to say avoid this. And the other problem is that do you start on 8 or do you start on 7? Because the trickiest part for most people, the seguirilla, is the turnaround. So in this case, it'd be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if you count it that way and it really works for you and you can get away from the numbers and internalize, that's great. But I would not get too wed to these numbers because they're very confusing. The other method, which is another compromise, which I also would recommend you avoid unless you already really, if it really works for you, stick with it, obviously. But that's 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, that just feels terrible to me. I can't even say those numbers. But 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, it's just naming the beats a different way. So what I really recommend, even though it's not logical, I'm admitting this, this is not really logical, but this is what works, is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and. That last and that I just ended on, that's what gets everyone. For some reason with the Seguirilla, people get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1. Right here, people get really caught up. And I think it's because we start on 1, but after the 5, which is the end of the compás, there's that and right before the first 1. So if we think of the compás as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1, because obviously there's space between the 5 and the 1. So for the palmas, I'm not going to give you anything more complicated than this. Get used to going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Seguirillas can be insanely slow, and at a certain point, it's so slow, especially with a cante, that it feels almost rubato. And at that point, I would recommend just don't do palmas, especially if no one else is doing palmas. It changes the feel. Tientos and seguirillas have this thing where if you do palmas, they feel very different than if you don't, because they can be played slightly rubato or they can be played, to a click. The palmas being the click in this case. But seguirilla can really be any speed. So it could be as slow as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it could be really fast like a buleria. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You want to get used to any tempo, and you just need to learn to count them this way. Unfortunately, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 5. If you can sing any seguirilla material you have while you're doing the palmas, that's going to help you immensely. And this is true of any palmas pattern, really. But if we think of the basic compás of the seguirilla and the most common falseta, which is that escovilla, we would do ram, pam, pam, patikitum, pam, pam, tam, tikitam, takatam, patakata. We could do llamada. Pam, 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 takata, takata, tum, tam, tam, tum. Bum, 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 ba, da, ga, da. If we take that falseta, da, ba, 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 da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, bo, da, di, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da. This is proof that my voice doesn't have to be good for me to sing. The more you get into hearing the relationship between the music and the palmas patterns, the more useful the palmas patterns are going to be for you, and the stronger your compás is going to be overall. So spend time with this. I know it's more fun to play the guitar, but palmas actually become really fun once you get good at them. So do it. So one of the funnest things about palmas is doing the contratiempo, which is something that we generally do with 2 people. One person's just holding the bass, what we call, which is playing all the downbeats, and the other person is doing the contra, which is the offbeats, which is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so if you think of subdividing everything into 2 into eighth notes, the ands are the contratiempo, right? So if I was in 4/4, if I was doing tangos, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. There's a little trick which turns into a game, which is really helpful for learning how to do contratiempo. And there's a little thing you need to understand to make this work. 2 eighth notes in a row, 2, not 3, will either get you from your downbeat to your upbeat, or from your upbeat to your downbeat, right? If I do 1 and, that second one is an and. If I do and 1, the second one is a downbeat. So the game we're going to play involves going back and forth between playing the downbeats and playing the contratiempo. And the way we switch is by doing 2 eighth notes. And I will show you what a lot of people do, which completely defeats the purpose. So the game is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3. So these eighth notes, 2 eighth notes in a row, are what sort of knock us either off of the downbeats onto the upbeats or back onto the downbeats. However, what people tend to do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3. So if you do 3 eighth notes in a row, you're just right back on the downbeat. So that doesn't help. So the first thing you want to practice is going 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. I'm going to do this with a metronome, and we're going to do 2 measures of 4 on the beat, 2 measures of 4 off the beat, and the switch is going to happen on 4 with our double tap eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3. That's the whole game. However, it's not quite as easy as I made it look. I've actually practiced my palmas a lot, and I practice time all the time. One thing that I tell everyone is no matter how good your time is, it could be better. That's true of me. That's true of people who are much better at time than I am. That's true of people who are just beginning. Time is something you can always work on. And the moment where you think your time is perfect is probably the moment where you stop growing as a musician. It's incredibly important, and it's really fun. And this is a great little exercise to learn to stay on the beat and then to play good contras. If your contras are a little late, you slow things down. And if your contras are early, you tend to speed things up. Why is this? If I do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've just made the time between 4 and longer, which means I've made the time between beat 4 and beat 1 longer, right? Because that time between the beat and the next eighth note is, in theory, half of a beat. So if I lengthen half of a beat, I've lengthened the whole beat. If I come in too soon, 4 and, again, if that's the time between 2 eighth notes, then that's half of the time between 2 beats, which means if I speed that up, I've sped the whole thing up. So the goal is to really keep your contras right between the beat and the next beat. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. One little trick that you can try if you're having trouble with this is to speed up the time of your metronome and think of each beat. This is me speeding up my metronome, and think of each 2 clicks as 1 beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. This gives you a little more support. So if I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and there's still a click I'm trying to match. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is really helpful. The goal ultimately is to be able to internalize that subdivision. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, etc. So spend some time with this. It'll be really good for your time, and it'll make you better at palmas. The palmas for tangos are actually pretty straightforward. It's 4/4, so it should feel a little more natural. The weird thing, though, is that we don't actually do a palma on the 1, which is the downbeat. But what we do tend to do is do our foot on 1. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the only weird thing to know is that when you end on a strong 3 at the end of a llamada or a phrase, a cierre, something where you have a strong end on 3, you would just sit out the 4, and then it gets a little weird because we don't do 1 either. So one of the things you want to get used to is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 1, 2, 3. And the most common variation for tangos is just 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So we're just subdividing beat 2 into 2 eighth notes, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. And you'll notice on the last compás when I was closing, I could have done 1, 2, and 3, but it just feels stronger to go 1, 2, 3. So you can really do either thing. So the palmas that you want to practice for tangos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, just get used to going back and forth between them. These are comparatively straightforward. If you look for the link to Palmas loops, you will find loops of these Palmas patterns at various tempos. So you can play around with playing to these patterns, because in addition to learning to actually do the Palmas and hear these patterns, the really important thing as a guitarist is to learn to play over these patterns. Once these become internalized, they really support you and they help you know where you are in the compás. At first, as you're learning them, they can really throw you off. So it's an interesting dynamic, because you're learning the patterns and they start to make sense, and then you try to play to them and you're completely lost. And then with time, as you do them more, you start to understand better the relationship between the Palmas patterns and the music. And then when you pick up the guitar again, the Palmas makes more sense. So it's a little bit of a struggle, I know, but the more you do this, the more the Palmas will feel supportive, and the more they do, the more you'll internalize the compás, and your compás will get better.